Good afternoon, Ken Belkin here. You're watching the LawNewz Network. We are following the case of the People v. Zachary Adams. Zachary Adams is charged with first-degree murder, murder in the perpetuation of aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault in connection with the disappearance of Holly Bobo back in April of 2011. We will later today be having a journalist on who was barred from the courtroom for describing a juror over Twitter. But for now, I'd like to take us all the way back to the defense's opening argument in this case.
And so from there, they began to interview everybody. For years, they worked to solve the crime, and I think that the government touched on the fact that they had interviewed and talked to and investigated this person, Terry Britt. But that is not where the case started. So first of all, there's the next door neighbor, James Barnes, who heard a scream that morning. He heard somebody screaming from the direction of the Bobo house. And James Barnes, and he lived on the next door neighbor's property with his mother, Kathy Wise. And the first that the state really looked into was James Barnes. They investigated him. They searched his whole house. They spent months and months combing over them and making the Barnes family a big suspect in their investigation. They got their phone records. They just investigated them completely. And also, in the days before Holly had disappeared, James Barnes had a friend over. His name was Keith Clark. Keith Clark had been at the house. The state investigated Keith Clark with a vigorous fury. They got his phone records. They checked into everything about him. Then the next person that the state turned an eye against was John Dodd. John Dodd was a grandson of some people that lived down the road from where Holly lived. Somebody that morning said that they had spotted him in his white pickup truck right there in the area, and he had a four-wheeler also in the area, and there was some talk that maybe the person that took Holly had gone through the woods on a four-wheeler with her, and so they turned to all their investigative powers on James Dodd, and they absolutely tore his life up. It was hard on him because he suddenly became the suspect that everybody was looking at as the one who had taken Holly Bobo. And in a community that small, and everybody so very, very interested in what had happened to Holly, and people were genuinely very concerned about what had happened to Holly, that then rumors and just what was going on just spread like wildfire. So as soon as one person is rumored to have been involved, it was terrible. But the law enforcement investigations did all kinds of affidavits to get things on John Dodd. They searched his computers, they searched his telephone, they looked at his Facebook page, they were looking at his car, they investigated all of his property. As a matter of fact, they even had dogs that hid on his property and had allegedly traced Holly Bobo's scent to his driveway, or his grandparents' driveway. So he was thoroughly investigated at some point. Then there was another person who was investigated thoroughly, Blake Barnett. And they turned all their attention to Blake Barnett. And at one point, we're putting a lot of energy into him. Next, they looked at Terry and Janet Britt. The state of Tennessee looked at Terry and Janet Britt. They really investigated them. They got subpoenas. They searched their house. They did wiretaps on them. They looked at them very closely. However, through the wiretaps and through the subpoenas, and they even put listening devices in their house, they lived in a trailer, they had a metal roof, they were never able to get any type of, quote, confession from them. What they were wanting was some type of confession, some type of discussion between the couple where they were acknowledging, perhaps, that they had done this. They weren't able to get that, even though they did get a lot of circumstantial evidence in that case. Then law enforcement turned to Jerry Evans. Jerry Evans was a man that lived down the road near Five Forks, just down the road from Holly's house. And they turned to this man, Jerry Evans. They did thorough search on his house. They did all kinds of affidavits on him to get all kinds of information. They looked at him. There's another man who may or may not come to testify in this case named Michael Alexander. At one point, they were very suspicious that Michael Alexander was involved in it. There's another man that they investigated, Jason Nichols. And the morning that Holly disappeared, and case has been an absolute fire hydrant of information coming in. But one of the things they did is they got all the cell phone records from all the cell phone towers where Holly Bobo's cell phone pinged that morning. They got all the records of everybody else's phone who pinged at the same time her phone did. Jason Nichols came up as a person who was a registered sex offender. His phone pinged that morning, and his wife's phone also pinged that morning on 2 different towers where Holly's phone was. They investigated Jason Nichols. As a matter of fact, he had a potential possible kidnapping of another woman 1 week to the day earlier. And he'd also had he had accosted several women at the Hickory Mall, the old Hickory Mall in Jackson, Tennessee. So they turned their focus on Jason Nichols at some point. And then, of course, one of the more tragic things that the state did is they turned their investigation on Clint Bobo. At some point, the Bobos retained an attorney to represent Clint because the state of Tennessee was absolutely determined to show that Clint Bobo was somehow involved in this case. And they got all kinds of records on the Bobo. They got phone records. They oftentimes treated the Bobo family as though they were involved, limiting any kind of information that they shared with the Bobo family because they were treating them as though they were suspects in this case. And so all of that came up, and yet at the end of the Clint Bobo they really focused on at the end of 2012, all of this is transpired, and now as they're heading into 2013, and they're in the fall of 2013 headed into 2014, it's been 2.5, almost 3 years, and they still do not have a suspect that they can firmly go after. They don't have anybody that they've narrowed it down at this point as to who it is that has committed this crime. And at this point, and as it's been said many times by the TBI, this was the most expensive and most exhaustive investigation in the history of the state of Tennessee. And yet, when they came to 2013, they had nothing. They had a great big goose egg. They paid all this money.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm Ken Belkin. Today we are following the case of the people of the state of Tennessee versus Zachary Adams. Zachary Adams is charged in connection with the disappearance of Holly Bobo back in April 2011. Holly, very young, pretty blonde girl that went missing in Tennessee, and the search lasted for years before charges were brought against Mr. Adams and his co-defendants. They are charged with first-degree murder, that's murder with premeditation, and would be eligible for the death penalty should they be convicted. They are also charged with murder committed in the perpetration of aggravated kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault. I am here today with Paul Stanley, a local journalist who's been following this case virtually since the disappearance of Miss Bobo and had a very unique experience on reporting in this case in the courtroom. Good afternoon, Mr. Stanley. How are you?
Ken, hey, how are you doing?
Good to see you finally. We spoke, but now I can put a face to the name. So you had an interesting experience in covering this case as a journalist during jury selection. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Well, it wasn't jury selection. It was actually the first day of the trial. I was in the courtroom along with other journalists just tweeting about some things. And I made reference to the jury, and I in no way intended to identify any juror because I don't personally know any juror there. But just said something about the occupation of one, irritated the judge a little bit.
And what you said this over Twitter, right?
Yes.
And what was her occupation?
One was a bank teller and one was a high school teacher, and I made reference to both of those, just kind of about personalities, just irritated the judge.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. In New York, in the state of New York, where I'm from, at least, when you do a trial with a jury, they pass out these juror poll sheets. And the jurors, this sort of streamlines the jury selection process, and you can get a bunch of information about jurors, both sides, prosecution and defense, and they can weigh that information when sort of trying to figure out who to strike and who to keep on that jury. They do that in Tennessee, right?
My understanding is they do.
And typically, the occupation is on these sheets anyway.
Yes, I understand Judge McGinley's trying to run a very tight courtroom. Everyone's under a lot of pressure to make sure the trial goes well. Again, I had no intentions of identifying a juror, and I think it was somewhat of an overreaction. But the trial is continuing, and I'm staying abreast on LawNewz.
So you're banned from the courtroom.
I am right now. I could ask for for a motion to be to enter it again, but. To gain entry, but I'm following every bit of it, and the testimony thus far is riveting, especially to the local community.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what is the climate like in the community? Do they think Mr. Adams is guilty of these heinous acts?
Well, I can only tell you what I hear people say when I go out and have lunch, dinner, breakfast, etc., and that is people have always thought he is guilty. Even with the testimony now, they believe Zach Adams played a role in Holly Bobo's kidnapping, rape, and murder. Now, the question everyone is asking themselves, does the state plan, are they going to offer enough evidence to allow the jury to convict him? And Jason Autry's testimony the other day was widely discussed in the community.
Now, Mr. Adams, his brother allegedly confessed. Do you feel like the people in Tennessee are looking at the evidence objectively, or maybe they're caught up in the emotional aspect of this? It's a pretty white blonde girl. These people are drug addicts. There's no disputing that anyway.
I think the latter was true initially, Ken. I think people are caught up in it. They want justice to be served. I do believe that when talking to people throughout the community, they are looking at this objectively and saying, is there enough evidence? Is there enough evidence to convict him? They're leaning in the direction that there is, and they're hoping that there is. And they want justice done, especially from the family standpoint. I will tell you, many people are saying there are unanswered questions from Clint Bobo, the brother. They think he knows more than he is saying.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. My first question really is, the alleged coercion of the confession of the defendant's brother, Dylan Adams. Do people in the public there, is there the general consensus that this was a coerced confession, or are they giving this confession a lot of credibility?
Well, they haven't heard it in the courtroom yet. Dylan has what many believe is a low IQ, and some people have thought, well, he's not going to be a benefit to the prosecution or the defense because he can be so easily manipulated. They do believe Dylan holds the key to this. If his testimony is allowed, they think it could make a tremendous difference in the case, especially given what Jason Autry said about Zach and Dylan, and Zach asking Jason to dispose or kill Dylan.
Now, it's been said that Mr. Autry was offered some sort of limited immunity deal with the prosecutors, indicating that he would be treated more favorably for his testimony, his useful testimony. He's essentially a cooperating witness. Does the public, at least what you've observed, do they seem to feel like maybe you can't always trust someone whose testimony is being used to sort of save their own neck?
You will hear people say that. I think a local attorney summed it up best when he said criminals can tell the truth, good people can lie, and the issue is now is just how does the jury combine the two? How do they figure out what are the best statements that they can use in reaching a verdict?
Well, it seems to me that a lot of the heaviest evidence is really going to be this eyewitness testimony from Jason Autry. They don't have really any DNA linking Mr. Adams to the alleged murder weapon, and the murder weapon was only recently discovered, so it's extremely rusted out and corroded. But I'd like to take us back to a little bit of testimony of Jason Autry, and this is Jason Autry talking about the combination of drugs him and Zach Adams would typically abuse.
In order to do what?
To get.
Okay. And did you have?
I did.
Process that you wanted to do that one?
I did.
Explain it to the jury.
I enjoyed my DOC maybe was a cocktail of morphine and meth together.
So did you have one of those and didn't have the other?
I had the meth.
So you started making phone calls to Shane Austin and to,
Zach Adams.
all right. At any point in the morning, did you make contact with one of them?
I did.
And did you, which one?
Mr. Adams.
And did he call you or did you call him?
He called me back
Right?
and said that he was busy, that when they got to a location, that he would call me.
Other than telling you he was busy and when he got to a location, he would call you, did you ask him any details about what he meant?
I did not.
Do you have any idea of what time in the morning this was?
It was after 8. Probably 8:40, 8:50 maybe. Somewhere in that time frame.
Well, earlier you said you wanted to kill time until you could make a phone call.
That's correct.
So how late were you wanting to wait before you started calling them?
I made the first phone call. At the river, you can't get a signal. It's pretty tough to get a signal there. It's real low. And when I come out of the river, I made the first phone call at approximately 8 o'clock beside Palmer's Tool and Die.
So from 8 o'clock until you actually made contact, sometime within the hour, you had called both of them more than once,
Correct.
hadn't gotten a response, and then he finally called you back.
That's correct.
So what did you do after he told you, when I get to the location, I'm busy, when I get to the
When you get to the location, we'll contact you.
Okay.
I went that general way. I knew that I headed in that direction.
And I'm sorry, nobody here but you knows in what direction you're talking about. I went in that direction.
Well, I left Benton County, headed toward Decatur County, down Birdsong Road.
And why the Birdsong Road area?
It was the easiest access from where I was to get there. Plus, it would be a delay. I mean, it was just the easiest access to get there from where I was, other than going down the main road.
And did you talk to him again?
I did,
Who?
Mr. Adams.
He call you or did you call him?
I believe he called me.
What did he say?
He said, we're at Cuz's.
What did that mean?
That means that they were at 30 Yellow Springs Road, Shane Austin's house.
Your cousin.
He called him Cuz too.
But that's your cousin.
Correct.
So did you go there?
I did.
How far away were you? How long did it take you to get there?
Probably 20 to 30 minutes.
Did he just say that we are at Cuz's, or did he ask you for something? Or indicate that he wanted you to come there for some reason?
When he called me back, he said, I need to see you, I need your help.
And then told you, is that the first time or the second time? You said you
The
talked-
second time. I talked to him first and they were busy. The second time, He told me where he was at and he needed my assistance.
And when he said, I need your help, what did you think he meant at that point? What did you think the problem was?
I thought a batch of meth was locked up,
Meaning something in the cooking process was
meaning
going
it
awry?
had gained moisture and stopped making.
Okay. And so, was that fine with you to go help him with a batch of meth?
I was under that assumption, and it was.
Okay. So you headed to Yellow Springs Road?
30 Yellow Springs Road.
Will you, if you're standing on Yellow Springs Road, can you describe for the jury, I guess, the way Shane Austin's house trailer sat? In other words, was the driveway down? Could you see the trailer from the street?
From Yellow Springs Road, say this is Yellow Springs Road, there's a fence, a gate, downhill into a wooded area of pines, the trailer sits. Approximately 50 yards from the road, 40 yards from the road, somewhere in that, on the left-hand side.
I want you to start at the moment that you pulled into his driveway and tell the jury what happened.
Back here with Paul Stanley on the Law News Network. I'm Ken Belkin. We're following the people of Tennessee v. Zachary Adams, who is charged with the murder of Holly Bobo. In addition to the murder, he's also charged with murder in the perpetration of kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault. I'm here with Paul Stanley. He's a local journalist based out of Memphis, Tennessee, that has been following this case since Miss Bobo's disappearance back in April of 2011. Now, we were watching a little bit of Mr. Autry, who is really the primary prosecution witness in this case. He's the cooperating witness. He is the eyewitness testimony that ties the defendant directly to this account. Now, for everyone watching this trial that's not in Tennessee, what has been the most startling thing about it for you? The most jarring aspect of it?
Well, the Jason Autry testimony. That is getting the most attention, I think, whether you're local or throughout the country. And what Jason Autry said about Zach Adams and specifically about Dylan Adams.
And what did he say about Dylan Adams and his relationship to his brother Zach?
Well, just to remind the viewers, yeah, Dylan is the brother of Zach, and Dylan has reportedly somewhat of a low IQ. Right after the murder, Zach met with Jason Autry and said that Dylan was just incessantly talking about the Holly Bobo rape and murder, wouldn't shut up, and would Jason Autry would kill him. Would he kill Dylan for that? Autry had to think about it a couple of days, came back, actually took Dylan out in a boat in the Tennessee River, and was going to do the job before they encountered someone that would easily recognize them and decided not to do it. So, just one crime after the other, all based on an abuse of drugs.
But let's be clear here. And look, I am a defense attorney, so I am prone to wear the defense hat, regardless of how heinous the allegations might be. All of these things are really based on the testimony of Jason Autry, someone with a criminal record and a history of drug abuse. How believable
You're correct. And the
that?
jury's going to have to figure out whether or not he's credible. That's going to be the key in this case as it's been presented to us thus far.
And this, obviously this is a terrible thing for a community to endure, the disappearance of one of its younger members. How has the community been affected by this disappearance, even before, charges were brought and Mr. Adams was arrested?
Right after Holly disappeared, as I mentioned earlier, community members, churches, organizations went to help in the search. They followed the case. I mean, even for over a year after the disappearance, you would see posters on doorways of local businesses. Once the skull was found, once it was determined that she had been murdered, it took a different tone. It is, okay, who is guilty? How do we bring them to justice? Zach Adams and group appear, and the community wants justice done. In my opinion, I believe they want Zach Adams convicted. The issue is the state going to be able to put enough hard evidence forward for the jury to reach that verdict?
Now, this is an interesting question to ask, but do you think they want justice more, or do they want a conviction of Zach Adams more?
think they want both. I think they want justice first. I believe they want to know, and I'm for certain they want to know that Zach's the one who committed this. Right now, I would have to say the community is leading in the direction of they believe Zach Adams should be found guilty of this crime. Now, again, all the proof rests on the state. I don't think the defense is doing a very good job at all.
But again, the bulk of that proof that the state has is the testimony of a cooperating witness who's a known drug abuser and guilty of several other criminal convictions in his past. I mean, I just feel like this is a bit of a stretch for the state to bring these charges. Now, there were other people investigated in connection with Miss Bobo's disappearance, correct?
Correct, and we heard from some of those this morning.
And what are your feelings about those other potential suspects in this case?
Well, they all have common backgrounds. They all have history of multiple arrests, and most of them have a lot of drug abuse in their background. So again, it goes back to who is more credible. Jason Autry was seen by a lot of people I talked to as being a very credible witness, or a quite credible witness. I'm convinced, Ken, if you were with the defense team here, you would probably be making a mockery of him. I'm telling you, Jennifer Thompson's not doing a good job.
Oh, you're really buttering me up here, Paul. But you know, I just question whether or not, you know, and some of these other potential suspects, one of them is actually a convicted rapist on the sex offender registry. And, you know, I feel like this is someone that maybe should have been investigated a little bit more than Mr. Adams.
I think you're right in that. I'll also take you back to one other thing that was brought up this morning and on Friday, and that is Terry Dacus, who is a local criminal attorney in Savannah, Tennessee, at the time of Miss Bobo's appearance was a TBI agent. And it's my understanding that he failed to check the alibis out of the Adams gang, as I'll refer to them, and didn't maybe go dig deep enough into what was going on. His name has surfaced again, so I would love to hear from him. I think he could clear up a lot of the misconceptions of this case thus far.
Let me ask you something. Do you think it's possible for Zach Adams to get a fair trial in the state of Tennessee?
I do. I think the jury
You don't
is doing
think
the best
the
they can.
temperature is just too high, and the thirst for vengeance for the taking of this poor girl's life is just too palpable?
Well, right now, with great networks like LawNewz, people across the country are watching this. So if you moved it to another part of the country, would he be able to get a fair trial there?
But she was a member of this
I think he can get a
community.
fair trial in Savannah like he can anywhere else.
I'm not saying you can't get a fair trial in Savannah. I believe you probably get a fairer trial in Savannah than you might get in the Bronx here. But, you know, just to be completely candid, this is a member of the community, a young girl taken way before she should have been. Do you think maybe it's just there's too much emotion running too high for this man to receive a fair trial?
No, I think emotion's running high. I think he can receive a fair trial. I think the more difficult challenge for this community is if he's found not guilty. I think they will have a hard time grappling with that. It's just based on what I hear people say.
Yeah, even if he is found not guilty, I don't think he's going to be getting away from this. Now, there was a bit of a political aspect to this because when the charges were brought, several members of the criminal justice community were up for re-election right around then.
Correct. Yeah, Haskell McAdams was the district attorney at the time. Matt Stowe, a challenger, defeated him. There were some issues between Mr. Stowe and TBI that led to Mr. Stowe recusing himself, and that's why we have the Shelby County District Attorney's Office out of Memphis, Tennessee, prosecuting the case.
So you don't think that politics played any part in bringing the charges when they were brought?
No, not at all. No, I don't think partisan politics had a role in this at all. I think Mr. Stowe, probably overstepped some boundaries somewhere, and they've got a great prosecution team. I think they would have had a good prosecution team if they would have gone to Nashville or anywhere else.
Speaking of the prosecution team, Paul, I'd love to take us back to some of the opening statements that the prosecution made in this case, and I hope you'll stick with us for just a little bit longer. Your voice on this, incredibly useful and informative.
I'll be happy to.
So this is the prosecution in their opening arguments.
Drugs, percolate, right there. Nursing school, working hard and doing good. She had a boyfriend that she loved, Drew Scott. She lived with her mom, Karen, her father, Dana, and her brother, Clint. Dana wakes up every morning real early to go to work. Karen wakes up early to go teach school. She's a school teacher. She's known in the community as Miss Karen. Clint, 5 years older than Holly, 25 at the time, went to school and had a job. And that was the family. And they lived in a little house that Dana built with his dad. The house was on a small street named Swan Johnson, off another smaller street, Miracle Town Road, outside of Parsons in Decatur County. It's where Holly and Clint grew up. It's where they were still living. It's where they were supposed to be safe. It was their home. I couldn't have picked a prettier bitch. It was fun. The world may never know what happened to Holly Bobo. Zach Adams, older than Holly, real different. Meth and morphine and the dark things that go along with it. Meth and morphine and the dark things that went along with it. That was his life. His friends, Jason and Audrey, older than Zach. Zach looked up to him. But just like Zach, meth and morphine and the dark things that went along with it. Shane Austin, same. Meth, morphine, and the dark things that went along with it. And his brother, John Dylan Adams, who lived his grandfather right across the way from the house that Zach lived in. A younger brother who he treated badly, but the same. Meth, morphine, and the dark things that went along with it. As dark as this life was, in the immediate days, April 11th, April 12th of 2011, it was even darker for Zach Adams. Meth and morphine had become more and more and more. His girlfriend, he'd been with for some time, trying to leave him, trying to break up, trying to get away. On top of the meth and morphine, now threats and rage. Zach Adams in the days right before. I couldn't have picked a prettier bitch. It was fun. The world may never know what happened to Holly Bobo. April 13th, 2011. April 13th, 2011. That's the day on Holly's headstone. That's the day that she was taken. She woke up real early that morning, Wednesday morning, middle of the week, real early, to study for a test and to prepare note cards that she had to turn in that morning. It was a test that she wanted to do real good. And she was up real early in her little house in Swan Johnson with her family to study for it and to do her work. Dana up early to go to work. He sees her light on, her door shut, she's studying. He sees her light on and he talks to her through the door. Her dad. Didn't see her. The door was shut. Drops her look right there. Right there at the car. Gone. Just gone. For 3.5 years. About the same amount of time you send your son or your daughter off to college. For 3.5 years. September 7th, 2014. Her skull, her teeth, some ribs, pop, found in the woods, off the interstate, near cell phone tower, between two sawmills, just 4 or 5 miles from Zach Adams' house. Those 3.5 years didn't pass quick. It was eternity on top of eternity. For Karen and for Dana and for Clint, for family, for the community that volunteered and searched and searched and searched. For the men and the women in law enforcement who searched and searched and searched and followed lead after lead after lead after lead. They searched every outhouse, every well, every place they could, hoping against all hope that they could bring her back to Dana and to Karen. That maybe they could bring her back alive. 3.5 years. During the course of chasing lead after lead after lead, they had an idea. Not a bad idea. They had an idea. Let's check the local sex offenders. Holly's a beautiful girl. Let's check the local sex offenders. And law enforcement did, and they concentrated on one man, a man by the name of Terry Britt. A bad man with a history, man who lived in the same general area. And they ripped into his life. They ripped into his life. Talked to all his friends, all his family, his wife, him. Searched his house over and over. Followed him, watched him, tapped his telephones, tapped his house. They ripped into his life. But every time, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so what did the men and women of law enforcement do then? Did they give up? They spent 1.5 years ripping into this man's life and they got nothing. There was nothing there. Nothing to it. Did they give up? Did they just give up? No. They rolled their sleeves up, They put their head down. They retrace their steps. They circle back.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm Ken Belkin. We are covering the people of the state of Tennessee versus Zachary Adams, who's charged with murder in the first degree. That's premeditated murder, so he's eligible for the death penalty, murder in the perpetration of aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault. I am joined here today by Paul Stanley. He is a freelance journalist based out of Memphis, Tennessee, who has been covering this case since Miss Holly Bobo went missing back in April of 2011. Now, Paul, welcome back. We just heard a little bit of the prosecution's opening argument. Now, this is a small community, right?
Yes, Savannah's about 7,500 people. Decatur County, Parsons would be a little smaller.
This is not a big city. There's not a lot of anonymity in this community.
Not at all.
Not at all. So people talk, as they do in all communities, big or small, and I'm sure that there were a lot of rumors flying around about what the motivation is to this. I wonder if you could speak a little bit on that.
Well, ever since the disappearance, and especially when they found Holly's body, there's been some people saying that the night before, we heard testimony to the fact that Holly and her boyfriend were on a double date with her good friend and their boyfriend, and there was a creepy guy following them around, and they were uncomfortable. That turned out to be an individual identified as Shane Austin.
Shane, who's one of the co-defendants here.
Who's one of the co-defendants.
Committed suicide while in custody.
Shane went down to a hotel in Florida, committed suicide, so my understanding is we're not going to hear any of the hearsay or his comments because he can't be cross-examined.
So what was the general impression about this Shane Austin? He was acting strangely, acting a little bit in a stalkerish type manner?
Correct, yeah, on his cell phone, kind of looking at him, not too far away from him. And interestingly, I heard through the rumor mill and through innuendo that this was something that had maybe Holly had dished them or, blown the Adams boys or somebody off or made them mad, which ultimately led to the kidnapping. I don't know. My personal opinion now, and just looking at what's been presented, is that they were there. They were going to see the brother, or Zach Adams was going to see the brother. Holly was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, and things went south.
And Shane Austin, before he could be taken into custody, he committed suicide down in Florida.
Correct, in a hotel room. So, I don't know a lot of the events surrounding that, but obviously since he's deceased, can't use his testimony.
Yeah, well, a lot of what you just said would probably not be admissible under the hearsay rule. Some of it coming close to triple hearsay, from what I'm getting. But Shane Austin, the interesting thing about him is his cell phone is connected at the same time of the murder, along with the defendants. Correct?
Correct.
And this investigation, now she disappeared in 2011. Now you had said a little bit off camera to me that you felt that local law enforcement had bungled this investigation from its inception.
Correct. A lot of people think that Decatur County, they were treating this as a missing persons. She was going to be found. Lots of people at the crime scene. The morning of the disappearance, and the evidence was lost. There was criticism of the TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, that they bungled this in some form or fashion. But hopefully that we're going to see stronger evidence of that. I don't know.
Well, hopefully for the defense, they see stronger evidence that the investigation was bungled. But I'd like to take everyone back a little bit to the testimony of Texas Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Brett Booth talking about when they found the remains of Holly Bobo.
And
No, they hadn't been talked to. Nobody had ever been to them. Some of
after
them.
that, do you go out, talk to Mr. Adams's associates?
We do.
I object to the leading.
All right, Lee, go.
Did you go out and talk to Mr. Adams' associates?
Yes, we did.
Did you go out and talk to Mr. Dylan Adams' associates?
We did.
Go talk to Mr. Shane Austin's associates?
We did.
And Mr. Jason Andrews?
We did.
we've heard early on the first day of this trial about Mr. Dylan Adams and a man named Dennis Benjamin.
Yes, sir.
After you went out and talked to Mr. Adams' associates, to Mr. Austin's associates, to Mr. Autry's associates, was information provided from Mr. Dylan Adams? Yes or no?
Yes.
At some point, Zach Adams was arrested. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Years and years after this. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Y'all searched his house, right?
We did.
Tore it up.
We did.
I've seen the wood floor which y'all took apart.
Yes, sir.
Did you find any trace of Holly Bobo there?
No.
How many years afterwards was it?
This happened in April the 13th of 2011, and this was February, March of 2014.
And at that time,
3 years.
At that time in February of March of 2014, when y'all are taking apart Mr. Adams' house and searching,
Yes, sir.
did y'all have any idea you should have been checking in Shane's grandmother's barn?
No, sir. We didn't know that at the time.
Tell me about the day that y'all found it. Tell me about the day that y'all found it.
I got a call from Keith Bird. Keith is the sheriff in Decatur County. There'd been a call that came in to the 911 center in Benton County, transferred to Decatur. There had been human remains found near the 120, is a cell tower located right on the side of the interstate in his county. He was responding. It was a Sunday about 11 o'clock, Sunday, September 7th. I responded, met him there, along with that territorial agent, Brant Holt. And I notified, of course, chain of command in our division. And
Where was your attention called to? What place?
behind the cell tower, it's, I believe it's addressed 1000 County Corner Road, which is
Is it along I-40?
yes, sir. It's on the north side of I-40.
About how many miles from Shane Austin's house?
Maybe 3.
About how many miles from Zach Adams' house?
County road wise, maybe 5.
What was this place like, this cell phone tower?
Cell tower located right on the side of the interstate.
Probably passed it a million times before, hadn't you?
Have. It's dense wooded, dense back and in behind it, around it. Nothing around it other than woods.
Those woods, you're a hunter, aren't you?
I am.
People use those woods for hunting.
Yes.
Had you ever been hunting up over there?
No, sir.
What'd you find when you got there?
Found a cranium, upper part of the skull, and the mandible, jawbone.
When you saw the skull and the mandible, did you know it was her yet?
I knew scientifically, no.
You part
Had me.
Were you part of the search of the surrounding area?
Yes, sir.
Did you become quickly aware that her wallet had been found?
Yes, sir.
Keys,
Yes, sir.
driver's license,
Yes, sir.
promise ring from Drew,
Yes, sir.
and you know it was her?
Yeah, knew it was her. Her.
Okay, I know we're real bad at this.
That's okay.
Another one of these poster boards, Agent Lee.
I'll try to do better.
What we got in this poster board?
Yes, sir.
What are we don't just like generally? What are we looking at?
You're looking at the area along I-40, location of Holly's body, top left,
That's
County
enough.
Corner Road next.
That's enough for now. We're going to look at it. May I introduce this next one?
193.
Welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm Ken Belkin here. Today we are following the people of the state of Tennessee v. Zachary Adams. Zachary Adams is charged and indicted and being tried in connection with the disappearance of Miss Holly Bobo back in April of 2011. Mr. Adams is charged with premeditated first-degree murder, which makes him eligible for the death penalty. He is also charged with murder during the perpetration of aggravated kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault in connection with several other co-defendants. Now, Mr. Adams was not arrested in the immediate aftermath of the discovery of Miss Bobo's body, correct?
He was not. His name surfaced, but he was not picked up.
But it surfaced, but he was not charged in the initial aftermath, and other people were looked at, right?
Absolutely.
Now, where did Mr. Zachary Adams go from being a name on a list that, as you called, surfaced, to becoming a person of interest here?
I think a lot of rumors in the community. We go back to Rebecca Earp, who was his girlfriend, who at some point in time called and informed the TBI that Zach Adams needed to be someone looked at, was a person of interest. I think, from what I understand, law enforcement always had him as a, hey, we need to check him out, but his name quickly surfaced to the top when Miss Earp called him.
And Miss Earp made this connection with law enforcement several years after the fact, right?
Yes.
And it was actually, she made this connection after her and Mr. Adams' own relationship had begun to falter and fail, correct?
Yes, and there was probably somewhat of a lover's quarrel in here. Again, we're 7 years out. I don't know exactly when Rebecca Earp made the phone call to the TBI, if it was several years or months or whatever after the disappearance. But the first thing I thought was, okay, is this a lover's quarrel? She just mad and irritated with Zach. I felt like when she testified the other day that she did have some sympathy still for Zach.
Now, Paul, I'm going to press you a little bit. We've
All right.
got cooperating witnesses here, witnesses who stand to gain from the government for their testimony incriminating Mr. Adams. You've got the first time he becomes a suspect, it's by way of an ex-girlfriend with an axe to grind with him, putting the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation onto him. Does this all spell out reasonable doubt on some level?
You know, it could, but, Ken, I don't know if that's the first time his name had surfaced. Does it
But
spell
through
out reasonable
rumors,
doubt?
you
Absolutely.
said it was-
That's going to be one of the big challenges for this jury once they hear from the prosecution and defense.
Now, Rebecca Earp, I'd like to take us to a little bit of testimony of Rebecca Earp. She says that when she had put the TBI onto him, first she thought she was calling as a joke, and that this happened in amidst their own relationship failing. So I'd like to watch a little bit of the testimony of Rebecca Earp right now, which is the girlfriend of Zachary Adams, the defendant in this case.
You said he would tie you, I tried to write it down verbatim, said he would tie you up like he did Holly Bobo and nobody would ever see you.
Correct.
But at some point, didn't you tell the TBI later on that he said he would tie you up and put you in his closet?
We were in his closet when it happened.
And didn't he indicate to you something about you're claiming that he indicated to you that he would tie you up and put you in the closet like he did Holly Bobo?
No, I never said that. Not that I remember, no.
So if it's in a report, it's an error that you said he'd put you in the closet?
Yes.
Because certainly you lived there at the time and you know Holly Bobo was not in the closet.
Mm-mm.
And Holly Bobo was not in the Adams house.
No.
She wasn't kept there because you lived there, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And you certainly wouldn't have tolerated or hidden that fact from the police, would you?
No.
I mean, you weren't so in love with Zach Adams that you would cover up and hide a horrible crime like that for him, would you?
No.
And part of your conflict that you have is, you know, when the DA was asking you if it had been very hard, part of it's because you now feel like you dated and were in love with a person who's been charged with this horrible crime.
Yes.
And so that's something that's very hard for you to take because you feel like you've exposed yourself.
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And so in a way you're wanting to do the very best you can because you feel like you need to rectify some wrong. Isn't that right?
Yes.
I mean, you're eager to please the TBI and help them convict
I'm eager
Zach.
to tell them the truth. No, I wouldn't say please them.
Well, you want to help them convict Zach, though, don't you?
Yes.
You had a very good friend named Brandon Williams, didn't you?
Yes.
And Brandon Williams at the time was a best friend to you, almost like a girlfriend would be.
Yes.
And so Zach Adams actually on the day that Holly disappeared spent some time talking to Brandon Williams also on the telephone, didn't he?
I guess.
And he would have talked to Brandon Williams because...
Your Honor, I'm going to check this is not even conversations, this is a party to. She's talking about her client speaking with.
Talking to Brandon Williams.
Right.
The hearsay on hearsay.
Well, I didn't say what he said. I just said he had spoken to him.
Because I'm objecting.
She said he had spoken to him.
Yeah, and Brandon Williams was contacting you that day too, right?
Yes.
So when he was contacting you, he was working out the relationship with you. All were working on relationship problems with Zach Adams. Isn't that right?
I don't think so. No, I don't remember.
But you don't remember specifically.
No.
Okay. So now, here today, you testified that at some point Zach Adams said everything was ready to go in the back of the truck and there was a big blue Tupperware box back there,
Yes.
and he told you it was the remains of Holly Bobo?
Didn't tell me, no.
You're saying he said
They
out
was
loud,
having their own conversation. I was in a different room.
and you're saying now that he said out loud it was the remains of Holly Bobo?
One of them had said that, yes.
Okay. Well, you could certainly tell the difference between Zach's voice and John Mitchell's voice, couldn't you?
I just don't remember. I just remember going straight to my mother's after that.
Okay, so you didn't go to the police and report it.
No.
Okay. And all those times that the TBIs talked to you, you've not mentioned
I
that.
called the TBI after that.
Okay, you called the TBI after that.
Yes,
Now,
ma'am.
this is before you all broke up for the last time, is that right?
think so.
Okay, so you would have had an opportunity to mention the fact that they said, and did you decide they were joking about that? Or
No,
were
they
serious?
ended up telling me it was a joke to see if I would call the TBI.
So did you think it was a joke, or did you think in fact her remains were in the
I
box?
just blew it off. No, I didn't think that was her remains, no.
So you thought it was a joke?
Hmm.
Okay, and so you say you called the TBI, but this would have been before July of 2011, is that right?
No, this was after.
After July of 2011?
Yes, because me and Zach was already broke up when we was at John's house.
Okay, you know that the TBI has kept records. I mean, they have thousands of telephone calls that they've received from people. Did you give your name when you called in and said that it was in a big blue Tupperware?
I think so.
You gave them your name.
I think so.
Okay, well then when Joe Walker came out to talk to you February 28th, 2014, why didn't you say, by the way, why didn't you follow up on the fact that I said he had Holly's remains in a big blue tub?
When I talked to him on the phone, they said that they were going to go down there and check it.
But you didn't mention that.
I didn't think I had to mention it to him because I've already told him.
They are there on February 28th to talk to you about what you know about the disappearance of Holly Bobo.
Yes.
And at that time, you think it is not necessary to mention to them that at some point he said...
Because it was played off as a joke.
Okay, so now you're saying it was a joke. You did go ahead and call it into TBI, even though it was a joke, but you didn't mention it when you talked to them February 28th, March 5th, or March 1st.
I didn't think I had to because I think it would be on records.
Okay. You certainly repeated a lot of other facts at that time, though, didn't you?
I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Just trying to shut it down.
Now, you say that you introduced Zach to Natalie Bobo. That would have been after Holly disappeared, wasn't it?
No, it was right when me and Zach had started talking. This was before we even got serious. It was when I lived on 6th Street in Parsons.
And so it's just, I mean, you've never before told the TBI that you had introduced Zach to
Yes.
Natalie. When did you tell the TBI this?
From the get-go, I guess. From the very get-go.
Well, we reviewed that first report that you had with Ricky Inman. You didn't mention it to Ricky Inman.
No, not then.
Two things that we started to talk about that we didn't talk about on your examination. That's what I'm going to ask you about now, okay? Let's start on the day that you finally left in July.
Okay.
Zach Adams. Do you remember that day?
The day that I left?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it something you'll ever forget?
Correct.
Listen to my question.
Uh-huh.
Is it something that you'll ever forget?
Oh, no, no.
Can you tell us what happened that day?
We got into it.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm Ken Belkin, joined today by Paul Stanley, a freelance journalist out of Memphis, Tennessee. I am hearing that Holly Bobo is back in session, so we're going to go back live to the courtroom. Paul, thank you again for joining us.
Ken, thanks